Live Fit Podcast, Episode 89, Part 1 of a series all about sugar.
Welcome to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate you taking the time to lend me your ear. This is episode 89, What is Sugar? And as you can tell by the title, this episode is going to be all about sugar, explaining what sugar is and what it does to your body. But I'm not going to leave it there. In fact, I have a whole series of episodes I'm going to share with you all about sugar. In fact, this kind of came as a big struggle because I started working on this several weeks ago, and it just became this huge monster that I couldn't tame it, and it was overwhelming me and really frustrating, and I just was not happy or satisfied until I finally had the brilliant idea to split it up into multiple parts. And right now, as of now, I have 3 parts already written and ready to go. The first part, as I just said, is what is sugar? I'm going to explain what sugar is, where it comes from, a little bit of history, and what it does to your body or how your body responds to it. And furthermore, what you can do to decrease your consumption of sugar, should that be something you want to do, which you just might after you listen to this show. The next episode is going to be all about the most dangerous kind of sugar. Boom, 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 boom. And following that will be other types of sugars, sweeteners, such as agave and stevia and the artificial sweeteners, non-nutritive sweeteners. Then I'm going to follow those up with interviews from experts in the field. These are authors and doctors that have spent their lives researching sugar and its effects on the body. So as I sit here, I'm wondering, why do people eat sugar? Does that sound like a stupid question? Yeah, I agree. I say it, I ask it, and I'm thinking, it's a pretty stupid question because I think everybody's going to say that it tastes good or it makes a food taste good or it removes the bitterness from a food or it's fun. But you know what that really comes down to is entertainment. Yeah, you might get an energy boost from sugar. If you're an athlete, you're out there running, you might be able to sustain yourself by consuming sugar every 15, 20 minutes, something like that. But let me go back a little bit. Several years ago, I worked with a woman whom, when I offered her a homemade cookie that my wife made, keep in mind, they're not very sweet. They're just sweet enough so you know that they're sweet and not bitter, but they're really quite delicious, and it's pretty much like a bowl of oatmeal in a little, cookie shape. So I offered this to her, and she said she doesn't eat for entertainment. I kind of tipped my head like a dog who hears a strange high-pitched noise. And I said, what do you mean entertainment? And she explained to me that the only reason to eat sugar or any sugar products is for entertainment purposes, is for the mouth sensation, the sweetness that you feel. Your body doesn't need it. Your body needs carbs, but it doesn't need it in the form of sugar. And I started realizing that, yeah, she's right. Because we eat sugar because we like it. We don't need it. We listen to music because we like it. We watch movies because we like it. Read books, all these other things for entertainment. We go to, shows and plays and theaters and whatever it is. We gamble, whatever it is, because we like it, because it's entertaining. And that's exactly why people eat sugar most of the time. Yeah, I know there is that little energy lift it gives you, but sugar is not the only thing that'll do that. In fact, it's really not a very good source of energy. So I'm going to talk more about sugar and what it does to your body or how your body responds to it in just a minute. But first, I have some housekeeping I want to take care of. Now, I really hate doing this, but I feel compelled to do it because it's so important to the health of this show. Now, you're listening to the show because you care about your health. I care about my health. I also care about the health of this show, because if this show's not healthy, it can't continue to give you good health information. So if you can find just a couple of minutes to go on to whatever podcast catcher you're listening to me on, iTunes, Stitcher, Acast, I don't know what else you might be listening to it on, but leave me a rating or a review, but at least subscribe, because all those things really, really help bring the show higher in its status so people can find it organically. They don't have to find it organically. You can share the show with people you know and love or care about. Share the show with them so they can get the value and learn how they can live a healthier, happier, fit life. Another thing, if you enjoy the show and you want to help me out, you can help support the show by going to patreon.com/livefitpodcast. Very easy. You can donate $1 a show, $5 a show, $5 a month, whatever you like. I come out with a show about every other week. I try to every week. It just generally doesn't work out to get a good, high-quality show out that often. But my heart's in on it, and I'm still going strong. This is episode 89. I started 2.5 years ago, and I still love it, and I intend to keep going on. So if you want to be sure I continue on, please support the show. And finally, you can find all the information I've mentioned, links for Patreon, rating and reviews, and also leaving a voice message on the livefitpodcast.com. You could also email me if you have a question or comment at Glenn, with 2 N's, at livefitlean.com. All right, now, I think you'd probably like to get on and hear all about sugar. What is sugar, and what does it do to you? What is sugar? Well, it's a carbohydrate. It's a fuel. It's an energy source. It's the energy reserves in a plant that's used to power the seed as it germinates. Think of the yolk of an egg. This is what the chick eats when it's growing inside the egg. And the starch, or the carbohydrate of a seed or a fruit or a nut, is also used in the same manner to give the seed energy as it sprouts and sends its roots down into the ground and its leaves up towards the sun. Carbohydrate can be classified and broken down into 2 parts, simple and complex. The size and the complexity of the molecular chain of carbons, hydrogen, and oxygen are what determine the type of carbohydrate or saccharide that it is classified as. Now, complex carbohydrates can be classified in 3 different types: oligosaccharides, polysaccharides, and fiber. Don't worry, you're not going to be tested on any of this. I just want to give you a full explanation as much as I can without getting too technical. Now, what you really care about are the simple carbohydrates, because that's what we're here to talk about. Simple carbohydrates have another name: sugar. There are 2 basic types, and once again, these are determined by their molecular structure or the length of their chain. There are monosaccharides and disaccharides. Mono 1, di 2. Monosaccharides, there are 3: glucose, galactose, and fructose. Once again, you will not be tested on them, but you will hear those words again. Disaccharides are sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Carbohydrates are found in plants: the roots, the stems, the leaves, the flowers, the seeds, and of course the fruits. Carbohydrates are not prevalent in animal products. You will find it in milk and itty-bitty tiny trace amounts in eggs, but you will not find it in meat at all, any kind of meat, unless it's added there by humans, such as barbecue sauce. There are several types of natural sugars, and their difference is dependent on their molecular structure. Even though we're looking at the simple carbs, there still are differences in their molecular structure. Glucose, fructose, sucrose, galactose, lactose, and maltose. Woo! Let's just slow down a little bit and look at the first one, glucose. All forms of sugar break down to this very simple molecular structure called glucose. Eventually, They may not break down quickly or right away, but they will get there eventually because that is what the body uses for its main fuel source. And it's also what the brain uses as its sole fuel source. Glucose is rarely ingested by itself, although one time in Australia I bought a jar of glucose and it looked just like corn syrup. It was really thick and mostly clear, and I was very surprised when I tasted it. It was almost not sweet at all. I mean, really strange. Milk is sweeter than glucose was. This was 100% glucose, as far as I know, and it really was not sweet. It was very odd. You know where the sweetness comes from when you taste sugar? It comes from fructose. Now, granted, had I eaten that entire jar of glucose, it would have raised my blood sugar level, but the taste on the tongue is not the same as fructose. Now, interesting trivia I found out. The reason for that is because the fructose molecule fits very perfectly on our sweet taste bud that registers the sweet flavor or the sweet sensation when we eat something. It fits into it perfectly like a square peg in a square hole, whereas glucose and the other sugars and carbs do not fit as perfectly in there, so they taste only partially sweet. So fructose, many of you probably know, comes from fruit. And it's generally not found alone. It's almost always accompanied by another form of simple carbohydrate, mostly glucose. Now, glucose and fructose are by far the most common sugars, and they are found in almost every sugar you ingest, unless you're purposely somehow avoiding those two. And once again, even if you are, they all break down to glucose. Even fructose breaks down to glucose eventually, and I'll cover that in just a little bit. The sugars that you will find glucose and fructose in: simple table sugar, also called sucrose. There's brown sugar, sugar in the raw, honey, agave, corn syrup. All of the different white powdered sugars, whether they're finely ground up like icing sugar or big thick granules, sugar cubes, whatnot. That once again is called sucrose. Now, sucrose is made up almost exactly 50% glucose and 50% fructose. I'm going to cover these really quickly. Now, galactose is not found by itself. It is joined with glucose to form another ose or another sugar, lactose. Lactose is the natural sugar found in milk. Maltose is a natural sugar found in grains, and it is made up of 2 glucose molecules. What is the difference between a simple carbohydrate and a complex carbohydrate, other than what I just explained? But most importantly, what you're probably asking is, why do I care? Well, very briefly, simple carbohydrates, most commonly called sugars, taste sweet and absorb very quickly into the bloodstream. I'll give you more on that later, and this relates to why you care. Complex carbohydrates break down into simple carbohydrates, but they take a little bit longer, some quicker than others. And once again, I'll explain to you why this matters in just a second. Let me now go into how the body responds to sugar. So first of all, when you eat a carbohydrate in any form, simple or complex, you chew it in your mouth, or at least it's in your mouth, and it mixes with saliva. There, the amylase starts breaking down any complex chains of carbohydrates down to the simplest it can within the time it's given. You can test this on your own by putting a very plain carbohydrate in your mouth, such as a saltine cracker or maybe some plain oatmeal. It can be cooked, but make sure there's nothing in it but water. No milk, certainly no brown sugar, no cinnamon, nothing else. Plain, plain, plain. You could try it with dry stuff too and just put a little water in your mouth and chew it around. Now, the reason I want you to do this little experiment is so you can taste the flavor come out. You can actually taste the food you're chewing, this plain complex carbohydrate, become a little bit sweeter. The longer you hold it in your mouth and mix it around and chew it, even when it's a paste, just keep moving it around, you'll taste it becoming sweeter and sweeter. And that is the complex carbohydrate breaking down to a simpler form, which will taste sweet on your tongue. Now, this digestion or this breakdown of the complex to a simple sugar is halted as after you swallow, it reaches your stomach. But once it reaches your small intestines again, game on, it starts breaking down even further. And as it's broken down, it starts absorbing into your gut wall, into your small intestines, your duodenum, your ileum, and it depends on how long it takes to break down. It goes on further. It just a little bit absorbs at a time as it reaches the gut wall and is ready to be absorbed. It has to be broken down into its almost simplest form to get through the gut wall. There are two doorways that this sugar can get through. Fructose takes one, and then glucose and the other oses will take the other one. Now, the fructose will go straight into the liver, and it will be metabolized there. It's only metabolized in the liver. It will eventually break down to glucose as well, but it might not. I'll get to that in just a second. So when these sugars are absorbed, the glucose and other oses go into the bloodstream, and they'll find the cells in the body that need it most. Now, the brain, I said, only eats glucose. So it's going to go right to the brain. That's why when you're feeling kind of tired or lethargic, you can't think straight, and you eat something or drink something with some carbohydrates in it, especially a sugar, you feel better almost immediately. It might take 5 minutes at the most, depending on the form you get and how much you get, but you'll feel better right away. Now, when that glucose hits your bloodstream, your blood sugar level rises. And at that moment, insulin starts being released, especially as you reach your body's limit of how much glucose it likes to have in its body. The more sugar you have in your blood, the more insulin is released. Your body does not like to have too much glucose. It is very damaging to the body. That's the problem diabetics have when their when their glucose gets too high. Type 1 diabetics need to take insulin to lower that down. Now, how does insulin lower blood glucose or blood sugar? Well, insulin is called the storage hormone because it takes the sugar from the blood and it stores it. Where does it store it? It stores it in the muscle tissue and the liver. Now, an average person of average build, not too much muscle, not too little muscle, but an average amount of muscle mass, can hold about 2,000 calories of carbohydrates in storage form. The more muscle you have, the more you can hold, the less, okay? So any extra energy beyond its storage carrying capacity or any extra glucose beyond the amount your body can store as glycogen or glucose will turn into fat. So insulin is the storage hormone. It'll store glucose as glycogen in muscle and liver. It'll also store it as fat when those first two areas. Another thing that insulin does that most people don't know is that it prevents fat from being broken down to be used as fuel. Because what does fat turn into when it's broken down? Glucose. The reason insulin's in the bloodstream is because there's already plenty of glucose in the bloodstream. So it's going to prevent that fat from adding more glucose to the bloodstream. This is really difficult when you're a person who's trying to lose body fat. You cannot burn body fat when insulin is present. Insulin is present when you eat carbohydrates. The more you eat, the more insulin you have. The more the insulin is storing those carbohydrates. Now, this doesn't mean you should not eat carbohydrates. Your body needs carbs. You absolutely have to have it. But it doesn't need as much as most people eat. A bag of chips? Whoa, way too much. A Coke? Whoa, way too much. By too much, so what? What if I don't want to lose weight? I'm fine. I've heard sugar's bad for me, but is it really, or is that just overweight people talking? Well, first of all, sugar's addictive. Try going without sugar for a week. Even the thought of it causes people to panic. Sugar is addictive. It's been proven many times over. They found this by looking at a person's brain when they think about or ingest sugar. The same area of the brain that responds to addictions of other chemicals like cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, also responds to the presence of sugar, or even the thought of sugar. Sugar, as I just mentioned, causes weight gain when eaten too much. Yes, you can eat some, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the obesity rates have been going up dramatically, like almost exponentially, since the 70s. And what happened in the 70s? We started eating less fat and more sugar and more sugar and more sugar. I thought there was a lot of sugar around when I was a kid, and I was a kid in the 70s, and I remember thinking, wow, there's plenty of sugar, and now that we're more interested in our health and nutrition, there's going to be less of it. And it's the weirdest thing that happened. The complete opposite happened. Pretty soon, sodas are everywhere in everyone's hand all the time. People are drinking sodas in place of water. They're not drinking water ever. They're drinking sodas. Some people drink 6 to 12 cans of soda a day. I don't think I could do that if I tried. I could drink that much water, but still, that would be even pretty difficult. 12 cans of water? That's a lot. That's a lot of cans, by the way. So the 70s is when our low-fat experiment started, and in case you're not aware, it was an abysmal failure. Another reason sugar is bad for people is it's the cause of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Whoa. All right, so alcoholics get fatty liver disease. That precludes cirrhosis of the liver. But people who do not drink alcohol, or at least to excess, can still damage their liver with sugar, and fructose more specifically. It's caused by excessive amounts of fructose, because remember, the liver metabolizes fructose, not glucose. The liver metabolizes fructose into glucose and into fat. And when your bloodstream is full of all the glucose that it needs, and the insulin is saving it and storing it, the liver is not going to release more glucose into the bloodstream, just like the fat is not going to release glucose into the bloodstream. So what does it do? It changes it and turns it into fat. Now, some of that fat is free-flowing throughout the bloodstream called triglycerides. Some of that other fat stays in the liver and makes these little pockets. Now, you want to hear something really whack? Long time ago, the French discovered that if they force-feed ducks and geese carbohydrates, give them more food, literally stuff it down their throat, give them more food than they're used to eating, than they would eat on their own, their liver will become very fatty. And then what they do, after they kill the bird, is they take the liver and they serve it as foie gras. It's a delicacy, fatty duck or goose liver. Yum. Well, isn't that strange that humans pretty much do the same things themselves to themselves? I don't know that anybody's eaten our liver. That's a kind of a gross thought. But we're doing the same thing to our livers that people do to these animals to create a fatty liver. Here's another picture. Where do cattle spend the last 3 months of their life before they get slaughtered and turn into food for humans? They spend it in the stockyard eating grain, carbohydrates. What do cattle normally eat naturally? Grass. So they're eating high amounts of carbohydrates, dense energy forms. And guess what? It turns their meat very fatty. This is what gives it a juicier flavor, juicier taste, the marbling, all that stuff that humans generally like. But it's also bad for them. And if they were to feed them for longer than 3 months, they would eventually die. Pretty shortly, they would start getting sick and having all kinds of heart disease and difficulty walk. That's why they cut them off at 3 months. Another reason sugar is harmful is it is all but proven. Now, there's a lot of indicators, but there is still not quite any proof positive that sugar causes type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of clues, but until we can put humans in a very strict, controlled environment over a long term, like 10 to 20 years, we cannot prove that sugar has caused the diabetes. Most people do eat sugar. even if they don't mean to, because sugar is found all over the place. Not only is it found in sweets. I mean, we know it's in ice cream. We know it's in cookies and cakes and candy and all those types of sweet tasting things and sodas and all these drinks. But it's also found in condiments and lunch meat and bread and all these things you wouldn't normally think sugar would be in because they're not sweet foods. But pretty much anything made with tomato is going to have sugar added because tomatoes have a little bit of a bitter flavor sometimes, and people just don't want that bitter flavor. They want things to be sweet because you know what? If it tastes good, you eat more of it, then you buy more of it, then the company that made it makes more money. It's the truth. But if you're cooking a meal for your kids, you want them to like it, right? So let's say you put something out there and they kind of pick at it and they know they should and they're really hungry, so they eat some, but they don't really eat it. Well, that doesn't do them a whole lot of good and doesn't make you feel very good either. So a person is much more likely to make the food taste and maybe even look good, delicious, appetizing, appealing. And by making it a little bit sweet, they tend to eat more of it. It's just human nature. When you're eating sugar, when this sugar gets in your system, and keep in mind that it doesn't even have to be a simple carbohydrate. It doesn't have to be a sugar. It can be a complex carb because those break down to simple, which all break down into glucose. So even a whole grain of rice or wheat, when eaten, will break down into glucose. Now, that's the benefit here. The more complex, the longer it takes to break down. Boom. And that's really the crux of the biscuit there is how much glucose gets in your bloodstream at any one time. Not over the course of a day, but at any one time because it elevates your blood sugar level. And then the insulin comes in. So what we want to do is regulate that or keep that level from getting too high. If we add just a little bit of sugar now and later and later and later, then we're not going to have high levels of insulin. We're not going to have high levels of storage. We're not going to have that sugar turning into fat. So what can you do to mitigate your insulin response? First thing, dosage. You want to keep the quantity down as much as possible. Don't eat large quantities of carbohydrates. I stopped eating pasta years ago for this very reason. The devil is in the dosage. The more, the worse. The less you ingest, the better it is for your health. Or let's put it this way, the least harmful it is. If you must eat sugar, it is best to do so in a way that will allow a slow absorption. Always ingest sugar with protein and fats. Preferably eat those before the sugar, not after, because the presence of the protein and the fat in your stomach and intestines will slow the absorption of the sugar through the gut wall. You also want to spread it out over time. So regardless of what it is, whether it's a box of chocolates or a plate of pasta, the longer it takes you to eat it, the slower it'll enter your bloodstream. Now, let's say you have a box of chocolates. I had a client ask me this once, and she received a box of chocolates from her husband on Valentine's Day. Even though he knew she was trying to lose weight and that she had hired a personal trainer to do this. She wanted to throw it back at him and cuss him out, but she realized he gave it to her with good intentions. He loved her. He wanted to show her he loved her, and he was, a bit of a doofus and didn't really know a better way. So, and she did want to eat it. She did like candy and she liked chocolate, so she did want to eat it. So I told her, just spread it out as long as you can. Maybe have one at each meal or one a day or, however you can stand to spread it out, but like at least one an hour. Stretch it out as long as you possibly can. If you can wait longer than an hour, all the better. Now, finally, ingest sugar in its most natural state. So sugar comes in milk. Yeah, that's fine. Drink that milk. Whole milk, not the skim milk. There's no fat in skim milk. Even 1% doesn't have enough fat to offset that sugar balance. You're going to get a big sugar spike by drinking that milk with very little fat. Fruit is great. Eat fruit, but not too much of it because it still has sugar. Now, granted, it's a slower absorption, like eating an apple, for example, because all that fiber gets in the way and it slows down the breakdown of that glucose and fructose and slows its path to your gut wall. But you also get other nutrients, including water. And as I said, that fiber, it's very good for you. So do eat whole fruits. Just don't eat a whole pile of them. Now, some fruits are sweeter than others. Grapes, for example, are super sweet, and I would really advise you to avoid grapes. If you really love them, limit them. Just have a few. How do you avoid sugar? Avoiding the sweets is the first thing. But it's really difficult to avoid it entirely. Sugar is everywhere. People will offer you sweets with good intentions. Oh, here's some cookies. Here's a cake I made. Here's some pie. Oh, welcome in. Have a piece of pie. You know that's there. You might know it's coming. You might not. You might be dumbstruck and just don't know what to do and take it out of politeness, and then you feel you have to eat it. You don't have to eat it. You don't. Tell them you just ate. Tell them you feel sick. Tell them if you eat another bite, you're going to vomit all over the place. That will stop them. But the sugar that's the hardest to avoid is the sugar that's hidden in foods. You have to read the ingredients. If you don't read the ingredients of a food package, you're not going to know if sugar is added. By looking at the nutritional label, you'll see sugar, and that's going to show all the sugar that's included naturally, like let's say milk. There's no sugar added to regular milk, but it does have sugar on the nutritional facts label. Now, there is, of course, sugar added to strawberry milk, vanilla milk, chocolate milk, etc. Don't drink those. Just don't drink those. I don't care if chocolate milk is said to be a good recovery fuel. I don't buy it, and I don't want you to either. If you want more suggestions on how to deal with the sugar in your life, especially those sugar pushers, I suggest going back to episode 30 of the Live Fit podcast. It's called The Sugar Battle. My wife and I got on and we pontificated on how to avoid sugar and all the different ways it comes at you and your kids. And that was the real instigator of that show for us. Now, I know this goes without saying, but I'm just going to say it anyways because I'm giving you a list on how to avoid sugar. Don't eat sweets. Right? But no, here's the thing. The more sweets you eat, the more you want to eat. The less you eat, the less you want to eat because you're putting that taste in your mouth. And then that's what seems right. That's what's normal. Sweet things. Whenever I eat, it tastes sweet. And then if you eat something that's not sweet, let's say broccoli, oh, you don't like it. This is why kids don't like vegetables because they're so used to eating sweet things. Now listen, if sugar's not good for you, adults that are listening to me, it's not good for your kids either. In fact, it's doubly worse for your kids than it is for you. And I'm going to tell you about that in my next episode. I'm currently creating a program that will guide you away from your sugar life. Keep an eye out. It's in the works, but it's in beta testing right now. So once I have it all worked out, I'm going to make it public and I'll tell you about it. But it's coming out soon within the next month or so. So keep your eye or ear out. And I'm also working on several more podcasts, as I mentioned at the top of the show, about sugar. So you can learn more about it. If your questions were not answered in this episode, they just might be in the next. But I still encourage listener questions. So please give me a call, leave a voice message, leave me an email. Once again, you can find complete show notes and links at livefitpodcast.com. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope it helps. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit Podcast. Please subscribe and share with someone you care about. Read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about our weight management programs at livefitpodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.